Hello everyone, I'm Lakshya Shivram Krishnan and I work as a technical program manager at Google. I'm super excited to be speaking to you all about crafting a compelling presentation. While the goal of this content is to can be used for any presentation, I have largely kept the focus of this talk to be for technical presentations. So in this session, we will share about best practices on how can we structure presentations in a way that succinctly tells a compelling story. I will also follow it up with tips on what to do and what to avoid in creating a great technical presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. So let's begin with the first part on what does it take to structure a good technical presentation. I want you to think that before you begin to develop the presentation structure, spend some time in clarifying the presentation's goal. Ask yourself, why and what are you presenting and what do you hope to accomplish at the end of your presentation? It will clarify your topic, it will clarify your primary points, and it will clarify what should be your audience key takeaways. Without clear goals, it's very easy for our presentation to beat around the bush through the allotted time slot, leaving our audience confused and unable to recall the key points. So being very clear in our own mind about the goal of our presentation will help us ensure that we reach the audience and they take away a lot of value from our presentation. You also may want to ensure that while you select a presentation topic, ensure that you pick something that's compelling and interesting for your audience. Focusing on the audience can also help us define our goal and ensure that we are creating a presentation that's not only relevant but also something that they can resonate very closely with. Ask yourself, what do I want my audience to feel as a result of my presentation? What do I want the audience to do as a result of my presentation? And most importantly, what should my audience think as a result of my presentation? And that will also motivate us to create a clear call of action at the end of our presentation. So once you've defined the key takeaways of your presentation, you can start to think about how you're going to present all this information that you have thought about. Many of the best presentations frame the talk as a journey, starting out by presenting a problem, describing the search for a solution. Then of course, there's an aha moment that shifts the audience perspective in a meaningful way before we wrap up with the key takeaways for the audience. We are going to be using this exact storytelling structure to frame our presentation. So there's an introduction, there's problem description, there's a solution phase, and then we conclude with results and finally the conclusion. So let's dive deeper into each of these storytelling arcs and see what is it that we want to cover at each phase of this presentation structure. We begin with the introduction. Take time to introduce yourself and introduce the topic. This is a perfect time for us to set the context and give a motivation for the audience on why they should be listening to you throughout the course of your presentation. In the problem description phase, we clearly articulate what is the problem and how is it relevant to our audience. In the solution phase, we describe and share how did we arrive at the solution, and if there were multiple approaches and we selected one over the other, we call it out here. In the results phase, we try and share with our audience saying what was the exact result and most importantly, what was the impact of this solution? What did we achieve through this process? Last but not the least, it's very important to wrap up our presentation with a conclusion by sharing our findings, our learnings, or in some cases, even mentioning the advantages and disadvantages of our solution. So let's start by digging deeper into the introduction phase. For the very beginning of your talk, you need to convince the audience that this talk is worth paying their attention to. You need to convince that the solution is important and it's a comprehensive problem that we're trying to solve. Your first slide should be an example of the problem you're solving or some other motivation that you want to call out. It's important for us to keep in mind that often in the digital age that we are, introductions can start even before you start speaking. So keep in mind that as you continue to grow your brand in the community, it's likely that some, if not all the audience, already are aware of you even before you start speaking. Even if it's just about reading your bio from the event website. It's always important to play an active role in managing your personal brand so that you have control over how the world and specifically your audience perceives you. Your personal brand can show through your bio, your reputation in the community, or with this audience, what you write and post on social media or how you went through your previous speaking engagements. So bear in mind to have a good personal brand for yourself so that you leave a stronger impact on the audience through your talk. So here's how my first slide would look, right? While I talk about what the topic is about and what is the motivation behind this talk, I also leave some time to introduce myself. And what does introducing yourself mean? You call out a few highlights that establish who you are and why your audience should listen to you. Try and keep it short. A short 3 to 4 lines would be a great start to talk about yourself. However, if you want to use this audience to talk more about your brand, you could spend a minute or two extra in talking a little more detail about why they should listen to you. So here on the screen, you see a short intro that I gave myself beyond just saying that I work as a technical program manager in Google. Here I call about causes that are important to me, causes that I champion, and something that helps me build. The last line really helps me build credibility with my audience and motivates them to listen to me. This slide captures a few pointers on the power of a good introduction, but I leave you with 3 tips. 1, own your introduction. Spend enough time and effort in saying what are the 4-5 key points that you want to sell yourself to your audience even before the content of your talk starts. 2, always remember to customize your introduction for the audience. And lastly, have someone else introduce you if that is a feasibility, because that enhances the credibility that you've built in the community. After the introduction, we move to the second phase, which is the problem description. The problem statement is really where you get into what everyone is here for. This is why you are actually giving the presentation. This is a perfect opportunity for you to present the problem that you're solving to the audience and convince them 2 key things. 1, the problem is worthwhile, and 2, the problem is challenging and they should be listening to what comes next, which is the solutioning. So the problem statement, this is from one of my sample decks where I try to convince the audience saying it is beneficial for us to create more conversational experience like the Google Assistant that are customized and catering to our own field of work. Right. So this section of your presentation should be able to answer first, what is your problem statement, and 2, what is the value and add that you are adding to your audience, right? And this goes back to knowing your audience, what their needs are, and tying that to your problem statement, right? So you see a sample problem statement here where I was talking about creating conversational experiences, and I talk about with voice becoming the new normal, how can we leverage it to get things done, how can we personalize this experience across all compatible devices, and how can we extend the Google Assistant for our own actions and our own use cases, right? So this clearly calls out the problem statement, and most times the audience will be able to relate to some of these problem statements and be curious about what is the solution you want to offer to some of these points. The third phase is the solutioning itself. So you could build on the slide, but here I say, hey, we are going to create a personalized action on top of the Google Assistant, where we are going to have an interactive conversation with a style store, right? And then we go around in detail about building that solution and having a demo and things like that. And then once you've called out the solution using actions on Google, you go to the result and you call out, hey, this is how my architecture diagram was through the result, and this is how we're using the devices that we have in hand, personalizing and customizing to say a cloth store experience, and how should the audience requests be fulfilled, right? And you could obviously dive in more details through your presentation, but this is just a gist of how you could structure each of these 5 phases through your technical presentation. And finally, it's just as important to share your learnings and conclusions as it is to share your solution, right? So what would conclusions entail, right? Make sure you leave your audience with the results you created for them. Give them a call to action. Give them about like the slide says, presenting is about persuasion. How can you persuade them and motivate them to take certain actions as a result of your talk, right? Your call to actions could be something for them to incrementally try out, for them to probably go on and build their own solution with a similar problem statement, with a similar stack. It could be anything, but make sure you call you make a call to what that action should be, right? And it could be anything. It could be to buy, to visit, to sign up, to learn, to take a code lab, to educate themselves on the technology. It could be anything, but ensure you share the learnings and you call that out on what should be their next step, or what should be their key takeaway after this presentation. Here's a sample. So in my slide, in my conclusion slide, I clearly call out what are my learnings from this whole solution and what is the clear next steps that I want the community to take. Right. So as part of this talk, I said that, hey, I want you to join the community of people who are building actions, for their use cases, but I also want you to do a certain code labs and, use this content that I've shared with you and build your own action today. Right. It's always good to leave some time for question and answers, especially for live sessions, because that's where you will really get to have a dialogue with your audience. And of course, if you would like your audience to contact you, to be in touch with you, it's always good for you to also put a note on how they can reach out to you as part of your thank you slide. So here we conclude the first section about structuring a good technical presentation, but it would be half complete if I don't tell you some effective do's and don'ts for effective presentations. So I've said this enough, but this is so important that I'm reiterating it again. It's super important to know your audience, right? It's a funny rule. We can say ABC, which means audience always comes before content, right? Even before you create any content, you need to know who your audience is. You need to understand the audience. And it's not difficult to find an answer to this question, right? You need to do research about your audience, and there are plenty of ways to do this, right? You can either go to the conference site, understand the details on who would be attending it. The easiest thing that I do is I just ask the organizers on what kind of audience do you expect. Is it going to be early career folks? Is it going to be like a mix of students and people from the industry? What is it that is their primary goal for attending this conference? Because that helps me cater my talk to the needs of my audience, right? It's always good to put yourself in their shoes, try and think about what is it that they would expect, what is it that they're concerned about, how can you help them solve some of their problems, and it will definitely help you land your talk better if you put in some of these considerations to your talk. And while you're preparing your talk, remember, don't jump into creating slides first, right? We've spoken enough about defining your goal, understanding your audience, defining your goal. It's really important to organize, right? You want to probably spend some time brainstorming on a rough draft on using the story structure, connecting the dots of the story structure. It might be easy for also you to pen down, certain things either in a doc or a sheet. Draw the flow of your presentation. And once you've created your outline, it's not going to be super tough for you to build your slides, right? It's at the end of the day, you have the tools available, you have the content available, you just need to put it, in a suitable medium, right? But in this process, try and make a few edits, try and edit your format, make it more compelling, more resonating for the audience. And once you have the first 3 steps ready, it's going to be super easy for you to build your slides. I also wanted to caution you, saying it's important that you understand your audience will mostly be people with different skill levels, right? As a speaker, you may be expert on the topic that you're speaking, but you absolutely need to be sure that you are connecting to every person in the room, not just to the expert section of the people, right? So it always helps to ensure that you remove some of the jargons. If you're using some acronyms that people are not familiar about, call that out at least once in the starting of your presentation, so that you're not going to leave a section of the audience cut off from your talk, right? There was a study done in Princeton which showed that when a speaker uses cliched descriptions, the audience really forgets the content that went before it, because their mind is trying to process this jargon, which is like complex in some sense, right? So you are going to take away your audience attention when you throw these jargons to them. Make sure that, if the best approach is you build your content incrementally, so that folks who are beginners or who are with medium level of expertise can follow through the incremental stages and can relate to you better when you build incrementally and bring in more complex components to your talk, right? I showed you a diagram even before I go into speech processing and natural language processing. I sort of called out the flow on how you use a device, how the speech to text happens, and then how the text is actually how natural language understanding comes into play to sort of make sense of the speech to text conversion, right? So this way you're helping your audience flow with your content, and the chances of them dropping off from capturing what you're saying is much lower if you have this flow, incremental flow to your talk. Ensure it's also interesting to ensure that majority of your talk content is for people with medium level of expertise, and you can always drop in a few nuggets for the experts in the room, so that you're catering to majority of the audience through your talk. Who doesn't like stories, right? Stories are memorable, and we all know about how many companies have started in a garage, right? And in fact, there is a saying which many companies say that they've started from garages, even if they haven't, because that's a story people will remember, right? I've heard another story internally where one of the developer advocates was going to a Firebase and Angular conference, right? And he didn't title his talk as learn Firebase and Angular, right? What he did was, his coach actually helped him use the power of personal connection to weave in a story, and he titled his talk, How to Become a Better Dad with Firebase and Angular, right? So he spoke to his audience about how he learned Firebase and Angular, and he did that by building an online game with his son, right? To this day, that was one of the most well-received talks, because the speaker went that extra mile in having a personal connection. People will remember the stories that you say, right? And humans are wired to remember stories and personal connections. So if you can weave in that personal connection through your talk, it really goes a long way. Now, I did tell you about the storytelling format, but with technical presentations, with many of them, I do acknowledge that not all can fit into the 5-stage story format, right? In that case, a good thing to do is to use the tell, show, tell format. What does this mean? Ensure that your opening tell sets the right context. When you say show, in the show phase, you show the features and deliver what your opening tell had promised. And then you close off with a final tell by showing the benefits or even the learnings, right? This is also a good structure if you cannot use the 5-step storytelling format, right? When it comes to the formatting of your slides or formatting of your content, we know that many of the events today are online events, right? People are watching content on mobile and tablets. So make sure that your formats, your fonts are clear, legible, use less words, talk more through the slides, use excellent contrast. Like you will see one really fancy text and one very simple text, but trust me, the information overload on the brain is much higher when there is so much of color and font in your text, right? So you see, this won't be so easy for your audience to read, but the simple and the plain text will be more clear and more easier for your audience to consume, right? So try and use larger fonts, less words, do well on contrast. Don't put too much text on a slide, right? When a new slide goes up, the audience will immediately switch to looking at the slide, and even if it's for a few seconds, they'll stop listening to you. So if your audience has to read a lot of text, they're going to tune out and probably not even listen to you, right? This is one reasons where it makes a lot of sense for you to put visuals and graphics, so that you are keeping the audience engaged and you're talking through that visual and graphic, so that the audience is also listening to you in addition to looking at your slides. As a rule of thumb, having 3 lines of text for a bullet point is always too much, right? Shorten the text, break it into pieces, just use keywords if needed, so that your audience can skim through it and not ignore you for too long as to what you are speaking, right? As a speaker, try not to read the slides word for word, because that's something that the audience can anyway see. If you can give more context, if you can give a more colorful script while your points on the slide are helping you frame that thought and connection, that's what slides are for, right? And no technical presentation mostly is complete without showing code, right? Now, if I am going to give this picture on my slide, people are A, going to be finding it really difficult to read, B, they're going to be cut off, right? So I would say at max show 6 lines of code, and I'll show you in the next few slides, use syntax highlighting. Don't put a lot of code on the slides, right? And if you really need to show more slide, do not create a wall of code, but create movement in your code, right? Make it easier to read by showing only some at a time, right? The audience will mostly need to focus on one line at a time. So you must use animation, use pointers, whatever that is, right? So this is what I mean. If you need to show more code, go line by line, say, okay, I'm beginning a for loop and this is what I'm trying to do, and inside that I'm assigning, and use pointers, use arrows to create that, to keep the audience engaged and show them how you're incrementally adding to that code, right? In this online world, we cannot rely on Wi-Fi, right? So always be prepared to have a poor network connection and have your backups in place, even if it is as simple as having a hotspot, right? And when I say don't rely Wi-Fi, it was even applicable to Steve Jobs at such a big stage, right? Let's see this video. This was one of the launches.
We're going to switch over to some backups here. I have a feeling we might have the same problem. There we go. Yes, I know that. I don't want to sell you the data network. Well, geez, I don't like this. All right, let's go back to the primaries. I'm afraid I have a problem, and I'm not going to be able to show you much here today. Try one more time here. Boy, I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on. Oh, here we go.
Okay. I'll pause here, but what I wanted, the gist of that video was to say that now with mostly everything being online, we must always have an additional backup in case we don't have the best of internet, right? Know your narrative, but ensure that, if it's a demo, you have an offline demo handy. Have your backup hotspot tethered when you're on screen. And if even possible, I think pre-record the demo and voiceover in case a live demo or the internet is flaky and and gives up on you, right? So these are some of the strategies you could adopt to keep ready, to keep yourself prepared, even in case of, say, your Wi-Fi doesn't come up, or something else that could happen is you've prepared like a list of speaker notes, but your speaker prompt doesn't work while you're maybe there's no extra screen, or there is you can only mirror your screen, your extend feature is not working in a particular projector setup. These things happen, right? So ensure that you know your narrative, ensure you don't get stuck when you just have slides there and you need to create the script on the fly and talk about it. You don't have your presenter notes handy all the time. But it may work during rehearsals, it may not finally work at the time of the event. So ensure that you are well prepared, even without some of these things, to ensure that you deliver a very meaningful presentation. To conclude, these are a few do's and don'ts. Know your audience, start with an outline, remove any jargon, try and make personal connections as much as possible, make your fonts legible, clear, learn the tell, show, tell format. Don't use too many words on your slides, don't read the slides, don't put a lot of code onto your slides. Don't over rely on speaker prompts. For all you know, you may not have them in some certain venues. And most importantly, don't rely on Wi-Fi when it is an online event, right? I'm super glad that I could speak to you and share some of these learnings with you. I want to leave you with a small quote by Nancy Duarte, who is one of the masters, and she's written books on writing effective presentations and writing effective stories, right? I've spoken about this enough, but this quote really summarizes it well. It says, the audience does not need to tune themselves to you. You as a speaker need to tune your message to them. Skilled presenting requires you to understand their hearts and minds and create a message to resonate with what's already there, right? Information, there's no dearth of information, but how do you put soul to that information and convey to your audience? That's what will make your presentation really compelling. Thank you so much. It was really good speaking to you.